Hey folks, welcome back. So recently we looked at the starter set for the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Roleplay Soulbound game from Cubicle 7. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll just say Soulbound from now on, if you don't mind. But we could see that the starter set was really well put together, the pre-gen characters were really varied, and the game system is really nicely presented, really elegant. And in general, I'm a big fan of the system, so after I picked up the starter set, I quickly picked up the core rulebook, which you see in front of you right now, as well as most of the rest of the line. I think I'm only missing Era of the Beast at this point. I wanted to show off the core rulebook for the system and show you a bit more of the vast expansion of the possibilities you get beyond the starter set in the core rulebook alone. When you add in the player's option books for Champions of Destruction, Champions of Order, and Champions of Death, which are out so far, you get even more stuff. Then you can do crafting with the Artifacts book and the Steam and Steel source book, which we'll look at in a future video. It's just a really rich game system with a really high quality across the line. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. Right at the start, you see we get this lovely set of end papers here, which shows you the Great Parch. Now, this is the area in the realm of Akshay where the players are intended to start. If you look at the map, you can see Brightspear over here. That's where the starter set adventures are set. And one of the campaign books, which we'll look at maybe in a future video, is set in Anvilgard up here as well. So there's quite a lot to do just in this one realm, and this is one of 8 realms, and all of them are allegedly near infinite in size. So you can effectively make up anything you want in these different realms as long as it suits the flavor of that particular part of the mortal realms. The cartography looks great. All the major cities are highlighted here down below with their coat of arms, so you can easily find them on a map. It's just really well done in general. So then as we dive into the book, we see the insignia for Sigmar here, suitably badass for your typical Warhammer faction. So if you look at the table of contents, you can see the rulebook in total comes to about 352 pages, I think, when you include the index, and is absolutely packed full of stuff. So it starts off with some basics of role-playing, then right into character creation, which is really nicely divvied out into an 8-step process, which is easy enough to follow. Then a listing of character archetypes, which are really great. There's 23 of them to start with. Then we get into a long list of skills and talents. Then we have a chapter on equipment, goods and services, weapons and armor, all that good stuff. Then the actual rules, which only go from page 123 to 154. And then we have the wonderful endeavors that you can do between adventures, which give your character something to do and actions to take between major missions and outings that they may have, which is really nice and something that's missing really being codified in the rules in other games. Then we got a ton of background on the mortal realms themselves, along with major organizations and factions. Then we have details on the Great Parch. Then we go into the religions and beliefs, all linked to these different gods, including the nasty dark gods of chaos. Then we have the rules for magic, a list of spells, and then some really nice rules for creating a new spell. Then there's the game mastering chapter, and then an extensive bestiary that covers about 40 pages. So there's tons of variety as well for antagonists, but there is a separate bestiary volume as well, which itself is really worth buying. So if you want to beat stuff up, this is definitely the game for you. And again, it's totally different from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where you're kind of average folk living in the gutters of the Imperium in the kind of Warhammer old world. And here in the Age of Sigmar, you are big damn heroes. You start out pretty powerful and you only go up from there. So you will fight a lot of serious demons and huge monsters in the course of this game. It's a lot of fun. You can see as well, right from the start, the layout, the fonts, the design of the book, and the art is fantastic. I won't bore you with the intro stuff, except to note there's a nice little basic section which gives the outline of how basically every test in the game works. So you create a dice pool, appropriate attribute plus the training level in your skill, and that'll be the number of d6s that you roll. You roll all your dice. Then if you have focuses in the skill you're using, you can raise your die result by 1 for each focus that you have on one particular die, so potentially turning a die from a failure into a success. And then after that, you check to see if you have enough successes to pass the test. If so, you win. Congratulations. And that's basically the system at its core. Of course, there are variations of that, opposed tests and extended tests and so on that are in the rules section, but really knowing just these 4 steps will get you through an awful lot, surprisingly. Then we have a bit of background in the Soulbound. So basically, this is an apparently very painful process by which different disparate souls who are sort of divinely inspired to defend the mortal realms are brought together and have their essence intertwined with the others in their so-called binding. This Soulbound process brings your souls together and entwines them until death. So apparently it's incredibly painful and difficult, and only a few people survive, but those that do survive can draw upon each other's power, and that gives you that group resource of Soulfire, which you saw in the starter set, that you can use for really powerful effects during the course of the game. But of course, gaining Soulfire is accordingly quite difficult. So that also gives you a nice nice little setup for a party structure, right? You are a binding. The one exception, of course, is the Stormcast Eternals, which we'll see, as they mentioned multiple times during the course of the book, they are not part of the binding. However, if they end up dying and getting reforged and brought back to life, they do still add 1 to your group's soulfire, so they do have that connection to it. And that's pretty much the core, and we jump right into a nice bit of background along these pages with some beautiful illustrations, sort of catching you up to, from the early days of the mortal realms in this setting. So we have, Sigmar and Nagash and other gods, and then there was a dark age of chaos, which you see on the following pages, where Sigmar was pushed back to the realm of Azir in the heavens, and he came up with the idea of building the Stormcast Eternals, which these guys here, and they started beating back forces of chaos over time, gradually carving out little bits of civilization again. And so now there's sort of unified resistance to the chaos gods for the first time in centuries. However, now we have to worry about the god of death, the supreme necromancer Nagash. He spent centuries preparing a massive ritual at his horrible black pyramid in the Realm of Death, and that led to something called the Necroquake, which spread across all the mortal realms, causing the dead to rise and slaughter the living all over the place. So he's kind of the main big bad evil guy you have to worry about, unless of course you play as one of the champions of death, in which case you're trying to further his cause, and you can play as undead characters yourself if you like. It's very cool. So now we're at a stage where the newly constructed civilizations that Sigmar has allowed to be built through the efforts of his Stormcast Eternals need to be defended against the Necroquake and its after effects and the sort of oncoming battle against Nagash. So the gods need the help of the people to defend the mortal realms, and so that's where the Soulbound come in. So that's you. Then we get into character creation. So right at the beginning, they lay out how to do freeform character creation. It's really easy. Basically, you just give yourself 1 in each of the 3 main attributes, body, mind, and soul. You choose any species that you like. You then have 35 XP to spend on increasing your attributes, gaining skills, and learning talents. And in the advancement section later in the book, it shows you the costings for all that. 35 XP doesn't sound like much, but each talent only costs 2 XP, for example. So you can get quite a lot of stuff for 35 XP. You can then choose 2 common weapons or a common weapon and shields, and you can choose a common, light, or medium armor. And if you are a Caradron, you instead choose one of the sample rigs, which we'll see more about that later on. If you're a Fire Slayer, you instead choose the number of Urgold runes equal to your soul attribute. You begin with 200 drops of Aqua Garanis to spend on additional equipment. However, if you're a Stormcast Eternal, you instead begin with 40 XP, so you get more stuff, better stats potentially, more talents, etc. And all of your equipment has the Sigmarite trait, which makes it much harder to destroy or damage. So you can see that the Stormcast Eternals, they're obviously designed to be more powerful than even stronger mortal warriors and sorcerers and so on, but they balance that out by restricting their access to group resources like Soulfire. You begin with 100 less drops of Aqua Garanis. So there are ways to kind of counterbalance the fact that they will be pretty tough right from the get-go. And then they give you these 8 steps for how to create your characters. So you have your archetypes, which we get to in the next chapter, and there are 23 of those. Those are really easy to start with because they tell you, which are the eligible species you can choose for that archetype, which is typically just 1. And it tells you what the role of that archetype is, what their core talents is that you get automatically, what skills you can choose to place additional XP in, and what equipment you get. And then you're pretty much ready to go. You just make a few choices about species, additional talents, where you're going to spend your few extra XP, and then you're ready to go. Here they explain the different species that are available for play. So each of them has a specific advantage that goes along with their nature. So humans are one of the most numerous and widespread of the mortal species, and they're considered really adaptable. So that's their species bonus. And in game terms, it means that they gain 1 additional talent automatically at character creation, and it could be any talent that they meet the requirements for. If you're a Stormcast Eternal, basically you're not born, but you're made, forged from mortal souls, alloyed with the celestial energies of the cosmic storm, and beaten into the living weapons of Azir upon the anvil of apotheosis. All Stormcast Eternals were once paragons of humanity. Then they talk about the stages of that, and their main species bonus is the ability to be reforged. So basically when you create a Stormcast Eternals character, you roll 1d6 to determine how many times you've been reforged, which is basically how many times you've died and been brought back to life again. If you roll a 6, then you roll again and add that result to the previous, and you keep doing that for any result of 6. When you die, you then are reforged, so that could take anywhere from hours to weeks to years. Basically, the GM will work out a narratively appropriate time for you to rejoin the the group. And since Stormcast Eternals are fundamentally bound directly to Sigmar, they can't become soulbound and they can't use Soulfire. That's one of their main restrictions. Typically, a Stormcast Eternal will have been dormant for periods of time. They will have been brought to life and reforged many times. They have very unusual life cycle, if you like. Then we got the elves, I guess, but they're elves, basically, as you can tell from the pictures here. They have tapered ears, sublime physical grace and beauty. They have a great affinity for magic. They're also extraordinarily long-lived. And one thing to note, along all the pages throughout the book, you'll see they have cross-references for important bits of rules or background that are mentioned in the main body of the text. Absolutely love that. Again, it makes the book much easier to use, and it's something that I've often praised Monty Cook Games for doing, and it's lovely to see Cubicle 7 doing the same for this line. So, naturally, the species bonus for elves is that they're long-lived, and that means in game terms that they get an additional 2 XP to spend on skills during character creation, and those 2 XP must be spent on the same skill. Then we have the Duardin, which is the setting's name for dwarves, essentially. You can see they've got the cool mohawks that they often have in the Warhammer visualization of dwarves. So they're devoted to gods that are related to forging and having long memories. So they love to build stuff and they love to hold grudges. So they're skilled builders and crafters, and that's reflected in their archetypes. Their species bonus is too stubborn to die. That means in game terms that their maximum wounds increase by 2. So you get 2 additional spaces on the wound track, which as we'll see later is pretty dang useful. Finally, we have the Sylvaneth. So these are basically tree people. They're born from soul pods, and their face spirits are shaped from life magic. Their physical bodies are grown from the wildwood. They tend to look sort of humanoid, but they can vary a lot in size and shape. And they have a natural armor due to their bark, underneath which is a heartwood core. All of them are bound to Alariel's spirit song. If you're in the realm of life, which is Alariel's, you can use the spirit song to communicate with any other Sylvaneth in the realm if you make a soul test. And if you're successful, then Sylvaneth will understand exactly what you're trying to tell them, no matter the distance. The natural species bonus for the Sylvaneth is, of course, their natural armor. So they have bark, gives them a base armor of 2. If their armor is damaged, say by a weapon with the rend attribute, then it regrows and is repaired by itself after a rest. They can't wear armor on top of their natural armor, but they can reinforce their natural armor with iron bark oil, which will give them a bonus. So after you choose your species, then you choose your attributes. These will be defined typically within your archetype, if you're using an archetype. Attribute ratings range from 1 to 8 for player characters, but can be higher than that for some really bad monsters. So your starting attributes are determined by your archetype, but you can swap the values of 2 attributes if you want to. Then you move on to skills and talents. So each archetype will have a main skill, and there are 3 possible levels of training and 3 possible levels of focus. And the number of levels of training is the number of d6s that you add to your dice pool when you're testing that skill. Talents, meanwhile, are special abilities that can trigger through various different means. Either they can be something that's always on, or they can be something that is activated by using meta, which is your individual meta currency, if you like, that regenerates one point every turn in combat. So if you are using an archetype, you begin with both training and focus in your archetype's core skill, and then you get some additional XP to spend on training and or focus in new skills, and they give you a list of skills which are applicable for your archetype, and you follow the costings listed in the advancement chart. For talents, every talent costs 2 XP, but some of them will have differing prerequisites. And so, if you have some extra XP, then you can also buy additional talents. Most archetypes will give you a list of, say, 5 to 7 talents and tell you that you can choose a certain number of those automatically, and you'll start with those alongside your core talent that you get. Then after that, dealing with skills and talents, you move on to equipment. So your archetype will tell you what equipment you already have, and then you'll have a number of drops of Aqua Garanis, which is both currency and healing potion, in a sense. So you can spend that on additional equipment if you want. However, beware that you then won't be able to use it as a healing method, which could be important. And then you move on to adding detail. So they give some nice example names for the different species, which is really helpful. Then you want to think about your physical appearance, which can vary depending on what species you've chosen. Note that in the age table here as well, they don't include an entry for the Stormcast Eternals because the nature of their existence is very strange. Their mortal bodies don't really exist anymore, and the reforging process can take varying periods of time. Sometimes they're just dormant for years at a time. So there's not really a straightforward way to measure their age as such, but the other 4 species you can, and they give you a random roll to find the age if you do want to do that, or you can just choose something appropriate. Then we have distinguishing features. So you can add anything else that someone might notice, like scars, tattoos, piercings, different scents, an accent, an affectation, something like that. So you can also choose hair color, height, all this kind of stuff. You can choose or you can roll for most of these. And typically you don't want to choose too many distinguishing features, less is more kind of thing. Just pick 1 or 2 things that really stand out and make use of those in your role play. You can see they give you lots of these random tables, which is really handy. Then we get into goals. So you need to choose both short-term goals and long-term goals for your character. Short-term goals are things you can accomplish in the relatively near future. I mean, it could be a day or even up to a month. They give you a few examples like repair my mentor's pistol, look up an old friend and kill them. And then you have long-term goals, which could take months or years or even a lifetime. And that could be things like, study every creature in the Great Parch, remember who I was before I was reforged. These are long-term character goals. And the benefit of achieving your goals is you get XP. So every short-term goal you achieve, you get 1 XP, and then you choose a new short-term goal to replace it at the end of the session. With the long-term goals, you get 10 XP, and then you choose a new long-term goal at the end of the session, and you can also then choose to retire your character at that point, which is pretty cool. They then become an NPC under the GM's control, and you gain half of the total XP of your current character to spend on your new one. So you can retire the character and start with a new character who is sort of half as strong. The benefit of that is your retired character then becomes a trusted NPC and a valued contact. They can provide, motivation to further adventures and help you build a network of allies throughout the mortal realms. So it's pretty cool. You can also talk to the GM and bring your characters out of retirement once in a while if you want to. So that's a pretty neat thing. Now we look at the party as a whole. So because it's a Soulbound, the party has this intangible connection at the soul level. So they have a shared resource of soul fire that they can spend, and the binding between them means they also share party goals. Short-term party goals work similarly to individual goals, but they'll be a little bit grander in scope, like locate a lost realm gate or reactivate the beacon of bright spear, which I think is one of the things you do in the starter set. And long-term goals as well will be there for your party. The difference here is that if you achieve a short-term party goal, every party member gets 1 XP, and you recover 1 soul fire. Then you choose a new short-term party goal. So that's really good. If you achieve your long-term party goal, every party member receives 10 XP. You get your soulfire refilled to maximum, and then you choose a long-term party goal at the end of the session. Any player at that point can choose to retire their character to an NPC status and get a new character with half the total XP again. So it's really cool that you have goals both character level and at party level. This reinforces the idea that the Soulbind is a special connection. It's more than just a ragtag band of adventurers. I mean, you are entwined together in purpose, and you've been brought together by a god through this painful, horrible process for a reason. And of course, you will manage your Soulfire and Doom as a party. So your initial Soulfire is equal to the number of members in the binding, and Doom always begins at 1. It can never go lower than that. And Doom will be accrued over the course of play, but you can reduce it through certain endeavors. You also need to set up some connections between your characters, and these just give you little things to talk about between characters and add to the role-playing depth of each character. Then step 7 is to bring your character to life. Oh, by the way, here's a connections table, which is quite fun. I saved so-and-so's life. I shared a secret with so-and-so. So-and-so punched me in the jaw once. I woke up a few hours later. Lots of little fun stuff that can, spice up the role-play within the group. Then they give you this list of 10 questions to answer to flesh out your character. So where are you from? What's your family like? What was your childhood like? Why and when did you leave home? Who's your greatest ally or best friend? Who's your worst enemy or bitter rival? What's a secret you have that no one else knows? That's a good one. What's your worst fear? Which is great for the GMs to exploit, by the way. What do you desire most? Also a good one for GMs to exploit, and that can be, part of your personal long-term goal as well. And then why are you doing this? Which I think is the most important question. Why would you decide to join this kind of extremely dangerous occupation of being part of a soul binding? You're venturing out into the depths of the mortal realms, confronting the forces of chaos, death, and destruction. It's a really dangerous job, and you're very likely to encounter a huge amount of danger and the possibility of death. So did you do it out of altruism? Did you do it to seek wealth and notoriety and glory? I mean, why would you do that? I think answering that question will really inform how you approach your character and their attitude toward the binding. So it's a really good one to think about. Then we have our finishing touches, which are derived attributes, basically. So you have melee, accuracy, and defense. These are derived attributes, and you calculate them using this ladder over here, and you mark the appropriate rating on your character sheet. So melee represents how good you are at hand-to-hand combat, and to calculate that, you add your body attribute plus your level of training in the weapon skill. Look at the total number here and give yourself the appropriate rating. It tells you, what what that rating means in practice as well. For accuracy, you use mind and add your level of training in ballistic skill, and that represents your ability at ranged attacks. Defense represents how hard you are to hit, so for that you add your body again, plus your level of training in reflexes, and again you look at the ladder and put the appropriate level there. Certain equipment like shields will allow you to add one more step to the ladder, so keep that in mind. If you're at good, but you carry a shield, that will move you up to great. Your armor is determined by the armor you're wearing, or your natural armor if you're a Sylvaneth, and that represents the damage that you can shrug off whenever you're hit. So each time you get hit and take damage, you will subtract the armor value from that incoming damage. The hit point damage that gets through then hits your toughness, okay? So your toughness is equal to the sum of your three main attributes, body, mind, and soul. Talent, spells, and your species can increase your toughness, so make sure that you work those out. Then you have your wound track. So your toughness is kind of like your meat points, if you like, that protect you against really getting hurt. It's how tough you are against really taking damage. And wounds are when you really take damage. So when your toughness gets down to 0 and you take more damage, you suffer a wound. And these take longer to heal, and they can become life-threatening. Each character can only take a certain number of wounds before being pushed to the brink of death, and that's shown on the wound track for each character sheet. Maximum wounds are equal to body, mind, plus soul divided by 2 and rounded up, but then some starting characters will have additional wounds. For example, if you were Dwarden, you get 2 more wound spaces on your track just from your too stubborn to die talent that is built in. Then you have initiative, so this is the order you act in combat, and that's equal to your mind plus your level of training in awareness and reflexes skills. So initiative in this game by default is a static number, so they give some rules later on for how to work out if people have the same initiative number who will act first. And it's really straightforward, and it works similar to Call of Cthulhu in that respect. However, there is an optional rule for rolling for initiative as well, where you can roll 2d6 and add to it, which is in the GM chapter. Your natural awareness is your inherent ability to perceive the world around you, so it's basically the expected successes you would get on a typical mind awareness test. So you calculate that by taking your mind attribute, adding your level of training in the awareness skill, divide that by 2, and then round up. So the GM will use this, for example, if they need to roll to see if you notice an enemy creeping up on you. They'll roll secretly to see if they beat your natural awareness skill. Finally, you have your medal. So these are your points that you can spend during combat to fuel things like talents, miracles, which are divine spells, and can fuel things like taking extra actions in combat. And this is simply equal to your soul divided by 2 rounded up. So you're always going to have at least 1. We have the advancement table here, which is really valuable. So keep that bookmarked if you are a player. So especially if you're doing freeform character creation. And you can see again that, the costs in XP for things is quite low, because getting XP, you have to achieve goals, so it takes some time. So it gives you the cost to increase an attribute from one value to another. The amount of XP you spend gets higher, obviously, as you're buying a higher level of attribute. The same with skills. 1 level of training is just 1 XP. 2 levels is 2 XP, and 3 is 4. And the same for focus. Talents are 2 XP. It's pretty easy to remember, honestly. The only thing you might need to refer to is the attributes cost table. The others, I think everybody will remember very quickly. And then we have this beautiful explanation of the main character sheet and the party sheet, which is great. I won't go through all of it, but just show you basically where the main areas are located. So you've got your 3 main attributes up here, your character name and personal details. You've got all the possible skills here. The squares represent your levels of training, and the diamonds represent your levels of focus in each skill. Then you have your goals here, short and long term, your connections, then your talents can be written up in here. All the combat stuff that you need to care about is all down here all together. So you've got level of prowess in melee, range attacks, and defense, from extraordinary all the way down to poor, which you can mark in here. And it gives you the attack DN table, which is very useful. So 2 or more steps higher on the ladder than your opponent. Your difficulty number for achieving a success is only 2. This is stuff you need to know during combat, and it's right there in front of you. Your attacks will be listed down here with your weapon, the dice pool that you'll roll. You can calculate that in advance. Focus that might be applied, the damage for that weapon, and any special traits that it may have. Your initiative score, your armor, metal, toughness, and your wound track and mortally wounded status are all here. Then the second page is pretty much your background, equipment, gear, and any spells and miracles you have access to. Then your party sheet, you've got an area to track your soul fire, so you can dump some tokens in there or just put the number in the total soul fire circle at the top. You can give your party a name, which I think is fun. You list your members. It reminds you of the uses for soul fire, which is very handy. Short-term goals for the party, long-term goals, and then rumor spheres, and threats. Now, these are important because your doom track, which starts at the beginning of your campaign at 1, will gradually escalate as, people in the mortal realms are always worried about something bad happening because bad things happen a lot. So these start out at rumors, and you'll pick up wind of those as you adventure around the realms, and then it'll eventually start spreading fear through the cities of Sigmar, and that's when you really need to step in and do something, because if a fear escalates to a real threat, then doom increases by 1. So you kind of want to step in before that point. So this party sheet gives you a handy way of keeping track of, how well you're keeping things from escalating to the threat stage and what your current doom status is. So yeah. The character sheets and party sheets are beautifully designed to give you everything you need for play, basically. Now we get into the archetypes. You can also, make custom archetypes, but really, there's so many in here with 23. Plus, in the expansion books, there's so many more. You don't really need to go too deep into that because, you'll need to work that into whichever archetype you choose. And of course, the cost for paying for skills with your additional XP. So we start out with archetypes linked to the free people. So these are the descendants of those that fled to Azir when the rest of the mortal realms fell to chaos. And they consist of many different types of people and different species. So they're pretty wide open. We have the first archetype here is the Battle Mage, so you're a wizard of the Collegiate Arcane, and you're trained to use magic, so accordingly your core skill is channeling. You are restricted to being human. The base scores are only 1 body, but you've got 4 in mind. Mind is what you use for, along with channeling, to cast spells, so it makes sense that a mage would have a high mind score. And your soul is 2. Your core talents are spellcasting and unbind, and unbind is a talent that allows you to attempt to do an anytime counterspell against somebody else, an enemy casting a spell towards you or an ally. Then you get to choose some additional talents, in this case 2 additional talents, which are related to casting, essentially. And then you have your default equipment as well. And that's basically how every archetype works. Everything you need to know is in this box here. You've got some great background info up here, so you know where you come from, what your main objectives are, what kind of background you have, and you're ready to jump into play, basically, once you spend your skill points. And since it restricts which skills you can spend your additional XP on, in this case 9, it again really encourages you to dive into that archetype and buy up training and focus in skills that would matter to a battle mage and not just anybody. Next we have the Black Ark Corsair. This is a elven archetype. You can see some horrible decapitation going on here, which is a nice reminder that not everybody who is a champion of order is actually a hero in the traditional sense. The Black Ark Corsairs, are quite deadly pirates, although nowadays they tend to use their skills more to fight the horrible monsters that are invading the seas of the mortal realms. They start out with body 3, mind 2, and soul 2. They're more focused on weapons ability, so their core skill is weapon skill. They've got 12 XP to spend on more weapons related stuff and stealth, survival, and similar things. The core talent is the bigger they are, which helps them by increasing their levels of attack against creatures bigger than them. And then they get 4 additional talents from this list, which is pretty awesome, plus medium armor, which makes them nice and tough, sea dragon cloaks, loads of other cool things. Then we have the Darkling Sorceress, who is another fairly nasty character, but still, and as it mentions here, few champions of order are what the common folk of the realms would call good. But even among the ruthless elves of Ulgu, the shadowy queens of the Darkling covens are renowned for their heartlessness and casual cruelty. Now, she is a sorceress here, so this is the elven version rather than the human battle mage. So again, you have a good mind score, but also a good soul score as well. Your spellcasting in this instance is going to be of the Grey School of Lore, which is explained more later on, and is linked to their native realm of Ulgu, the realm of Shadow. They get 9 XP to spend on other spellcasting related stuff, and they get some light armor and a witch staff, some poisons, and lots of other stuff, including a list of names and drops of blood next to each, which I find quite amusing. The Excelsior War Priest. So you're a War Priest of the God King Sigmar. You are focused on divine casting in this case. You can see he's got a holy tome here and a big warhammer. He's got a 2 in body, so a little bit of skill in combat, much less sort of arcane ability, but a high soul score indicates that you'll be good with divine casting, and that's what he focuses on. And that's reflected in the core skill being devotion, and the core talent being blessed of Sigmar, which means among your talents you could choose any miracles of Sigmar, as you'll note here, along with other talents that link to the war priest character concept. You start with light armor, a warhammer, a handhammer, and a Sigmarite tome, along with some other everyday items. Then you got the Trade Pioneer. So these are one of the more heroic archetypes according to the common people of the realm. So they set out, off into the wilds, which is is very, very dangerous in the mortal realms, and they try to build trade routes, searching for lost knowledge. And so they're seen as quite selfless and heroic peoples, but some of them are doing it for profit rather than altruistic outcomes, so you never really know. And they're pretty balanced, 2 in body, 3 in mind, 2 in soul, but they're focused around survival, because that's the most key thing if you're exploring the mortal realms. They also have the core talent of Trader's Cash, which allows them to roll a bunch of dice and basically have any successes laid aside that they can then use and attach to other rolls where they may need them later, which is a very handy ability. They get 4 additional talents as well, including the possibility of a loyal companion, like this little furry dude here, the Mustori. And they get light armor, 1 common melee weapon, 1 common range weapon, and 1 piece of rare equipment, but not very much Aqua Guaranis. So that's the trade-off you get, but you do get some cool items and a potential pet, which is fun. Now we get into archetypes of the Daughters of Cain. Note how each set of archetypes under a certain theme has a different thematic approach to how the main stat block is displayed, which I really like. So the Daughters of Cain are chosen warriors of the elven god of battle and bloodshed. So we've got bloody, claw-like aspect to their stat blocks, which is very cool. And this is their symbol here, a fist holding a heart that's shattering down the middle and pierced by multiple arrows. So, these are not traditional heroes, shall we say. The Hag Priestess, so she is the divine caster for the Daughters of Cain, basically, with 2 body, 2 mind, and 4 soul. She is an elf of the Daughters of Cain, core skill of devotion, and a core talent of Blessed of Cain. And again, because of that core talent, she can access any miracles of Cain, which are listed later on in the divine casting portion of the book. She comes with ceremonial armor, a sacrificial dagger, a bloodstained ritual chalice, which is her holy symbol, and various other stuff, including a whole load of Aqua Guaranis, 280 drops. Then we have the Witch Elf. So this is a bloodthirsty warrior, a zealot of Cain. So you're trying to nourish the bloody-handed god 1 sacrifice at a time. So you're an elf of the Daughters of Cain. You've got 3 body, 3 soul, and only 1 mind. So you're not big on casting, but you are big on weapons. Your core skill is weapon skill. You can also buy up ballistics and other related skills if you want. Your core talent is Blood Frenzy. So whenever you successfully inflict damage, your melee rating goes up, and you just keep getting more and more into combat and ripping blood out people. Which is pretty cool. You get 4 additional talents you can choose from as well, which include skills relating to combat, like backstab, and some really useful stuff. Graceful landing, which helps you save damage from falling. Contortionist, that gets you out of grapples. Useful stuff like that. You start with leather armor, 2 sacrificial blades, which is 2 daggers, 3 vials of poison, a bottle of acid, and 220 drops of Aqua Guaranis. Then we got the Fire Slayers. So these are the fiery sons of Grimnir, the fallen Duardan god of battle. So these are the guys that are generally reluctant to trust anyone outside their lodge, and they don't use armor. Rather, they hammer runes of Urgold into their skin, which sounds extremely painful. But as you'll see later, the runes have really cool powers attached to them. Again, we have a new format here for the stat blocks to reflect the Fire Slayers. We've got fiery outlines to the attributes and a fiery background as well, which is cool. The Rune Smiter is a battle priest archetype, so they have 3 in body, 3 in soul, and 2 in mind. You can see he's holding up his holy symbol, which is a forge key right there. He's got the cool mohawk, which we love to see with Duardan, and a fiery axe as well. So his core skill is Devotion, and core talents Blessed of Grimnir, Sense Urgold, and Zargrim. So that's pretty cool to get 3 core talents off the bat. You can also choose 2 further talents, including any miracles of Grimnir. So he is a divine caster type, but also very good in battle. For equipment, he gets any 3 runes, Urgold runes, right off the bat, plus a runic iron and hand axe or latch axe, which is a great axe, plus the forge key, and enough Urgold to forge 1 additional rune if you want to during an endeavor. And then we have the Battlesmith. So you're a master craftsman and storyteller. This is quite an interesting one. So as you can see here, he's got this kind of giant ancestral icon here and an ancestral battle axe right there. He's got 3 in soul, 2 in the other stat, so he's good at the leadership side of soul. So the soul attribute is not just about divine devotion, but it's also about your ability to lead and get people behind your cause, and that's what the Battlesmith does, using their core skill of entertain and their core talent of legendary saga, where they read out these tales that will give bonuses to your party in certain areas depending on which saga you sing. Plus you can choose 4 additional talents, one of which would be Blessed of Grimnir, so you can also be a divine caster if you want. You start with 2 specific runes hammered into your body, plus 1 additional rune, which you can choose, and you get your ancestral battle axe, a hand axe, and your icon of Grimnir, palm-sized nugget of Urgold, and 95 drops of Aqua Guaranis. Finally, for the Fire Slayers, we have the Doom Seeker. They've got 4 body, 1 mind, and 2 soul, so they are heavily battle-focused. Accordingly, they have a core skill of weapon skill. Their skill spends are all aligned towards combat, essentially. They've also taken the Barazak Doom, the Doom Oath. They can also choose 3 additional talents, which are focused on basically staying really tough and hard to kill in combat. They have by default the Rune of Iron Skin, which helps their armor, plus 1 other gold rune of their choice, any common 2-handed melee weapon, or any 2 common 1-handed weapons. Now we get to the Edeneth Deepkin. These are very reclusive side of the elves, so they hide from surface cultures in the Mortal Realms by living on the seafloor. So they're masters of the sea. They're not inclined to trust others, even those of their own kind. So here we have the Achillean Emissary. So they're a paragon of the elven arts of leadership and war. So they have a 4 in body and a 2 in mind. And their core skill is beast handling, which is pretty awesome. And when you learn about their equipment, specifically the Ether Sea Cloak and the mount that they have, which is the Fangmora, you'll see why this is really powerful. Basically, the cloak allows them and their mount to sort of swim through the air as if they were in the sea. Their skills are related to beast handling, of course, but also some related useful things like athletics, reflexes, and weapon skill. Their core talent is to have the loyal companion of the Fangmora, which we see here. And they can get 4 additional talents, as well as the Achillean chestplate, which functions as medium armor, a hell saber sword, a shield or volt spear pike, and the aforementioned Ether Sea Cloak. Then we have the Isharan Soul Scryer, who is a diviner and an arcane tracker. So they try to hunt their quarry using their arcane abilities. So they have 1 in body, 2 in mind, 4 in soul. Their core skill is devotion, and they have 7 XP then to spend on some useful skills, including arcana, awareness, things that will help you track your prey, if you like. And their core talent is Blessed of the Ether Sea, so they can use any miracles of the Ether Sea, which are a bit different from miracles from the other gods, as we'll see later. Plus, they can choose 4 talents in total, which is really useful. One of which is the Loyal Companion Scryfish, which we see right there. They also get a mantle and robes, functioning as light armor, finger claws, a Dower Chime staff, an Ether Sea Cloak again, and a Cyphar compass as a holy symbol. Then we have finally, the Isharan Tidecaster. This is one of the characters we saw as a pre-gen in the starter set. They got only 1 body and 2 soul, but 4 mind, so they're strong spellcasters. And accordingly, their main skill is channeling. They can also spend 7 XP in further related disciplines. They get core talents and spellcasting of the Deeps lore and Unbind. They can also get 3 more talents, which can include Arcane Discipline, Unbreakable Spells, Witch Sight, other stuff useful for casters. And then they get Azure Scales, which are light armor, a Pelagic Staff, an Ether Sea Cloak, and a carved elven rune meaning water. Now we get to the Caradhran Overlords. So these are the Bull Dwarden who took to the air at the onset of the Age of Chaos, and they live in the air in these monstrous, wondrous airships borne aloft by their humming engines, as they call them. So they are of scientific mind, and they believe in technology over using arcane forces. All of their tech is based on the use of ether gold, which is a near miraculous gas they mine from the sky. And they control 6 major skyports, which they use to build up trade routes and wealth. So they're known as honorable trade partners, but they also are very meticulous in writing their contracts, so you have to be careful they don't screw you over in the wording. Now these guys are really interesting because this is where you can really get into crafting, and accordingly their stat blocks are, cogs and a sort of gray metallic texture, which is great. So the Ether Chemist, you are part alchemist and part inventor. You seek ether gold seams to bring prosperity to your skyport and to further the knowledge of your guild. So these guys, their main skill is crafting. They can buy up points in related skills as well as weaponry and survival related stuff. And their core talent is Ether Chemist Guild Member, which gives them the ability to craft certain types of ether gold powered equipment, which is great. They also can choose 3 additional talents, and for equipment they get an Ether Chemist Rig, which is detailed later on in the book. It gives them a natural 1 armor plus the ability to power a bunch of ether devices. They also have a chemist kit and a book filled with notes and formulae, 100 drops worth of materials for ether crafting, and 85 drops of Aqua Guaranis. Then we've got the Endrin Master. So they are also based in crafting, basically all about building Endrins, and they're also pretty decent at fighting. So they are having a core skill in crafting, body of 2, mind of 3, soul of 2. They have then 10 XP to spend in additional skills, including, more crafting and also survival and weapon skills and so forth. Their core talent is Engineer's Guild Member, which allows them to do a different kind of crafting from the Ether Chemists. And they can choose 5 more talents on top of those, including combat ready, combat repairs, both really useful for repairing armor in the midst of combat. Things like Iron Will, Tactician, loads of stuff that can help your allies. And then they get an Endrin Master Master's rig. Similar to the Ether Chemist's rig, gives you a certain amount of power to use to power up additional devices. And a set of Engineer's tools, which you can use to repair things like armor and weaponry. Then we have the Skyrigger, who we saw in the starter set as well. So they harness the power of Aether Engine and fly above the land. And they have two main roles. So they have Engine Riggers and Skywardens. So Engine Riggers are kind of mechanics for the Ether fleets. They use rivet guns, saws, and hammers and stuff. And they perform hazardous tasks to repair aerial skyships. Skywardens are more like an elite aerial strike force of shock troops. You know, they both have similar mechanics, effectively, but different roles in the Kharadron Overlord Society. They got 3 body, 3 mind, 1 soul, and core skills in ballistic or crafting, depending on whether you want to be an Engine Rigger or Skywarden. Then you can spend skills appropriately as well to fit that core skill, and you can have a core talent of either Engineer's Guild member or Hit and Run. So again, if you want to be a Skywarden, you might choose Hit and Run over Engineer's Guild member. Then you can choose 4 talents. You can also choose Engineer's Guild member and Hit and Run within these 4, so you can end up with both of those core talents if you want. For equipment, you start with an Engineer's Rig or Skywarden's Rig, again, which is detailed later in the equipment chapter. Any common melee weapon, 2 etheric grenades or sky mines, which are great, a lucky charm, and 25 drops of Aqua Garanis. So they don't have much money, but they've got some really cool equipment, including these rigs, which allow them to fly, essentially. Now we get into the famous Stormcast Eternals. These are human souls that were forged into living weapons by God King Sigmar during the Age of Chaos. Of course, they got lots of weird stuff about their lifestyle. They're not ordinary humans by any stretch. And you can tell that in their illustrations, which really illustrate how they are special divine creations made for war, essentially. We start off with the Knight Azeros. These guys have 3 in body, 2 in mind, and 4 in soul, so they are pretty tough in combat, but also they have the ability to cast miracles. So their core skill is Devotion, accordingly, and their core talent is Blessed of Sigmar, which lets them choose any miracles of Sigmar out of their 3 possible talents. They also get Sigmarite Plate for medium armor, a Starblade Sword, a Dagger, Celestial Wings, which give them a fly speed, and a Celestial Beacon as a Holy Symbol. That's the lantern you see up there. So they're already really hardcore, these guys. And we have the Knight Incantor. So they are a warrior mage, essentially, but the Sigmarite equivalent of that. They're tough in body and mind, less so in soul. Their core skill is channeling, so they're more into using the arcane, but their spellcasting is from the Celestial School, as well as, of course, the core unbinding talent that the spellcaster archetypes all have. They can choose additional talents like potent spells, witch sight, and other stuff that help you with your casting. They still have medium armor despite being a caster, which is really cool. They have an Incantor's Staff, a dagger, a tabard of the Sacrosanct Chamber, and a grimoire, of course, for casting their spells. But what a great illustration. Look at the crackling of power around their massive quarterstaff. It's very cool. Then we got the Knight Quester. We had one of these in the starter set as well. They're really tough warriors, a champion of the Celestial Realm, and they have a high soul as well, so they are good at leadership. So their core skill is weapon skill. They buy up skills related largely to that, and their core talent is Heroic Challenge, which basically forces an enemy you choose to confront you or else take massive debuffs. Then they can choose 3 additional talents, which make them strong defenders or combat ready, help them intimidate people and related things. They get heavy armor, which is cool. It's loud, one of the traits it has, but it also gives you an armor of 3. Plus they can choose a Quester Warblade sword and a shield, or any 2-handed melee weapon. So if you have a shield, you would also increase your defense by 1 rank. So they're really great defenders in combat and really hard to put down, essentially. Then we got my personal favorite, the Knight Venator. So they're a Lord of the Skies. They've got 3s across the board for the core stats. Their core skill is Ballistic Skill, and they fire this cool great bow, and they fly around on the back of this Star Eagle. That's their core talent, the loyal companion Star Eagle. They can then choose 3 additional talents, including things like Combat Ready, Hunter, Star-Fated Arrow, Vanish, so they can basically dive down out of the sky with their Star Eagle and their Celestial Wings and just rain hell down upon the enemy with powerful arrows and talents that boost those arrows into real killing machines, which is just awesome fun. And I love the illustration as well. You can see the Celestial Wings of light bursting out, a hail of arrows coming down, and a Star Eagle just looking fierce and focused as well. The illustrations in general in this book are fantastic. Now we get the Sylvaneth. These are the tree people. We have a few different varieties of them. So we know that they're connected to Alariel, so they're closely tied to nature and life energy. And accordingly, most of these archetypes you'll see, you can buy up points in things like nature, crafting, things that relate to that general concept. And again, we have a style here for the stat blocks, which really is appropriate. Looks like a growing plant around each of the attributes. So the Branch Witch is particularly attuned to the sacred life of the life magic of the forests, and they employ druidic practices to defend the natural order. So this is your spellcaster in the Sylvaneth order, and accordingly their core skill is channeling. They can buy points in nature related stuff like nature and beast handling and stuff like that. Their spellcasting talent is Jade, so that's the main lore they use, plus Unbind, as usual. Then they only get 2 additional talents, but they're pretty handy. You can get an animal friend, a loyal companion, which is a bitter grub, which is that thing. For equipment, they get a greenwood scythe, which is a great scythe, a fragment of cycle stone from Giran, and 310 drops of aqua guaranis, so they can buy a lot of additional equipment if they want. And weapon weave is a useful talent, by the way, as well. That allows you to make magical weapons or to enhance weapons, which is pretty cool. Kurnoth Hunter, we saw them in the starter set. So they're a pretty flexible warrior archetype. They can wield bow, sword, and scythe, essentially. They have a 4 in body and a 3 in mind and 1 in soul. So pretty good stats, except for soul. They can choose a core skill, a ballistic or weapon skill, which is useful. And you can buy the opposing, the skill that you don't choose as your core. You can buy more ranks using your 6 XP, but it's not an awful lot of XP. Your core talent is Ancestral Memories. You can get 2 additional talents, including Hail of Doom, which rains arrows down on a whole area. You can get a loyal companion of the Quiverling. Your weapon, of course, can be a great bow, a great sword, or a great scythe. So any which way you look at it, you're going to be smashing somebody, which is awesome. Then you got your Tree Revenant Waypiper. They're a warrior spirit of the living wood, and woe betide any who trespass on the sacred forest. And look at these guys, very cool. This one has a scythe. Their core skill is weapon skill. They get 1 more XP than the hunter, so they can buy a little bit more of other skills. Their core talent is martial memories, and they can get 3 additional talents instead of 2, which is handy. Most of the other Sylvaneth only get 2 talents. But like the other archetypes, they do have 280 drops of aqua guaranis, and they also have waypipes, which allow them to travel through the room roots of the wildwood, so they can move unseen where living things grow and strike where you don't expect, which is sometimes very, very useful. Now we get into skills and talents. There's not that many skills in the game. I mean, they're all listed on the character sheet, and this just sort of describes how you would use them in play. And then there's just a list of skills. There's a little sidebar here that the GM can decide if characters who are not trained in a skill can attempt to test or not. This most often comes into play for tests that relate to specialized knowledge. But if you do allow an untrained character to test for something they don't have specialized knowledge in, you should come up with some sort of prompt from the player that explains why they might know something about that specialized thing in this particular case. So the skill list, got Arcana, linked to Mind, which is your knowledge of spells, Athletics, which is self-explanatory, Awareness, which is your perception of what's around you. If you want to perceive something hidden, then you do a Mind Awareness test. And particularly aware individuals are swifter to react in combat, so it gives you a bonus on your initiative. Ballistic skill, of course, is using ranged weapons. Beast handling is handling beasts. What a surprise. You can also tend to and care for creatures should they get wounded or become sick, and you can train creatures during your endeavors and so forth. Channeling is linked to Mind, and that's, of course, your spellcasting. Crafting is also linked to Mind, and there's a number of crafting endeavors in the Between Adventures chapter. Determination is a measure of your ability to press on in the face of despair and hardship and so on. So if you try to resist fear or defy anguish, then you need to use a determination test. Devotion is your ability to call upon your god's power. Dexterity lets you perform, sleight of hand tricks, concealing objects, picking pockets, that kind of stuff. When you want to hide things or deceive or misdirect others, you would use dexterity for that. Entertain is your ability to delight and amuse people using the spoken word. So you might tell stories or joke or sing or perform on stage. Fortitude, it's not like defense, which is about your fortitude in combat. This is a more general concept of fortitude in terms of surviving the unforgiving landscapes of the mortal realm. So hostile deserts, Arctic tundra, all that kind of stuff. And they can also resist poisons and illness more easily. Guile, linked to Mind, is your ability to act charming and convince other people or even seduce them or deceive them. Intimidation is linked to Soul. Basically, you're using your power of leadership and your inner strength to try and impose your will on others. And that could be through physical violence, the threat of physical violence. It even mentions suggesting the target's friends and loved ones could suffer if they don't comply. It's pretty nasty. Intuition is the ability to sense the ambiance of an environment and feel feel the tension if something is wrong. So that can mean reading people as well as places. So if you want to try and sense if somebody's lying to you, you would roll an intuition. Lore is about your knowledge of the mortal realms and history and stuff like that. Legends, travelers' tales, all that kind of thing. Medicine is your ability to heal others and your knowledge of drugs and treatments. So if you use medicine for tests, you can treat injuries, diagnose illnesses, and treat natural diseases. But, if you get a horrible disease from Nurgle or something, then you'd need to do something more impressive. Might is your ability to perform feats of strength, like lifting heavy things, holding open a metal gate or smashing through a door, stuff like that. Nature is how much you know about the flora and fauna of the mortal realms. Reflexes is the speed and skill with which you move yourself out of harm's way. So you use that if you need to dodge something happening in the environment, like boulders thrown at you or traps that chuck arrows at you or something like that. It also affects your defense and initiative, so it's an important skill. We also have stealth, linked to body, which is your ability to move about quietly and keep in the shadows to remain unseen. Survival is linked to mind, and that's used to survive in the wild, hunt, forage, find shelter, all that kind of stuff. Theology is linked to mind, and that's your knowledge of the many religions and spiritual practices of the mortal realms. And finally, you have weapon skill, linked to body, which of course is how good you are at hand-to-hand combat. Then we have our list of talents, and there are many of these. I'm just going to touch on a few that are important to particular archetypes. So for example, the ancestral memories. So basically, you draw on the memories of your Sylvaneth ancestors if you're a Kurnoth hunter. Every time you complete a rest, you gain training 1 or focus 1 in one skill of your choice, or increase your training or focus in a skill you already have by 1 to a maximum of 3. And you keep that until your next rest, at which point you can choose a new skill, or keep the skill you already have. Barazak Doom, the Doom Oath, is the Doom Seeker archetype for the Fire Slayers. So you've sworn the Barazak Doom, the Doom Oath. As you get closer to death, you draw upon the power of your Urgold runes to assure victory or to be consumed in a blaze of glory. Whenever your toughness is at 0, damage from your attack is doubled. And you double that before subtracting your target's armor. Blessed, of course, which gives you access to miracles. We have Blood Frenzy for the Witch Elf. Basically, if you make a melee attack and deal damage, then your next attack, your melee goes up 1 step, and it continues to go up as long as you continue to deal damage. So you can get all the way up to max melee ability if you keep drawing blood from your enemies, which is pretty cool. Then you have combat repairs, so that's really useful for the engineers to know about. Basically, you can attempt to repair an ally's armor in combat, and the difficulty level will vary depending on the familiarity with the material and if it's magical or unique. If you succeed, you restore 1 armor per success up to the armor's original rating, and then at the end of combat, the armor will still fall apart. Be aware of that. Engineers Guild member, so that's a useful one for the Duardin. So you're a member of the Engineers Guild, and you can take the engineering endeavor to forge etheric devices. Gunslinger is cool, so if you use a gun or ballistic weapon in each hand, then you get your accuracy increasing 1 step. So you can double wield pistols or hand crossbows or whatever and get a bonus for that, which is pretty awesome. We have Legendary Saga, so that's for the Duardin Fire Slayers. So there are 3 different sagas that you can sing. The Saga of Condemnation will basically make the enemy's spells harder to cast against you. The other 2 will give boost to your allies. So any allies in your zone that can hear the song will get their melee and accuracy 1 step boosted until the next turn. The Saga of Grimnir, any ally in your zone that can hear you deals additional damage with melee attacks equal to your successes on this entertain test. So that could be a lot potentially. Loyal Companions gives you your choice of different pets depending on your species and archetype. Martial Memories, so this is for the Tree Revenants. Basically you draw on the memories of the protectors of ancient days of the Sylvaneth. And at the start of a combat, you choose one of these effects. So if you choose Memories of War, your melee increases 1 step for the whole combat. Memories of Defiance, your defense increases 1 step for the whole combat. Memories of Dawn, you act first every round for the entire combat, even if other abilities or spells would allow another creature to act before you. So you always act first no matter what. Medic, that's a really useful talent to have. So basically, you can use this skill to treat the wounds of an ally. So instead of taking a rest, you can choose to spend the length of the rest treating an ally's wounds. And depending on the severity of the wound, you'll have a higher difficulty number. And then we got lots of other self-explanatory stuff: mounted combatant, piercing armor, point blank range, which allows you to not suffer a penalty to accuracy when using a ranged weapon at close range. Potent spells makes your spells harder to Rending Blow gives your heavy strikes the rending property, which allows you to damage armor. Then you have severe spellcasting. Choose a specific lore to go with that. Explains each of the lores here and what they're focused on. You can learn more than 1 lore of magic, but that will cost you additional XP and will have certain requirements. If you want to learn 8 lores, you need Mind 8. Star-Fated Arrow is a good one for the Knight Venators, so you draw an arrow and whisper the name of a powerful foe, sealing their fate. As an action, choose a creature you can see within long range, and the next range attack you make against them ignores armor. The bigger they are, we talked about before, so if a creature is of large size or greater, you get a increase of your melee by 1 step higher, which is pretty cool. Trader's Cash, which I mentioned before, you make a DN 4-1 mind survival test, and the number of successes is your Trader's Cash. You can put those aside, and then for any test of any kind, you can choose to expend a number of successes from your cash to add an equal number of successes to the result. You can also use these when bargaining or trading to declare you have just the item the other party is interested in. Whenever you rest in a city or between adventures, you can replenish your Trader's Cash. Then we have Unbind, which is the counterspell ability that all spellcasters have. Basically, it allows you to try to unbind anything, but the difficulty will vary. Difficulty of the test is equal to the difficulty of the spell, and the complexity is equal to the total success the caster achieved. So it's kind of an opposed test against the opponent. If you lose, the spell takes effect as normal. If you succeed, the spell is unbound and has no effect whatsoever. Unbreakable spells, which is a little bit over the top in terms of the title. It doesn't mean you can't unbind your spells. It just means that if somebody tries to unbind your spells, the complexity of the test increases by 1. Weapon Weave, I mentioned, for the branch witches. Basically, you can weave and shape plants into deadly weapons and other items. So you make a soul crafting test, and then you can create different weapons, and you can use the magical Weapon Weave endeavor to further hone the weapon and give it magical power. Witch Sight is really useful if you want to be able to follow the trail of somebody who's been using magic. And finally, you have Zargrim. This means that you can forge Urgold runes and can take the Forge Urgold rune endeavor. Then we have a list of miracles. Now, they're universal miracles. Each of these in general will sometimes they cost a metal to cast, like Divine Power costs 1 metal. And basically, you can attempt to unbind a spell using your devotion skill instead of channeling, and then you do the same process as unbinding, and you need to spend 1 metal for that. Most of the other spells, they have an added paragraph at the end where you can spend a metal as a free action to either add an additional effect to the spell or maintain it as an ongoing effect. Revitalize. Any creature you touch within close range immediately removes 1 condition, but if you use a metal at the same time, you'll cure them of all conditions. With Inspire Zeal, you guide the blows of an ally, and any ally within medium range, their melee and accuracy increase 1 step until your next turn, but on your turn you can then spend 1 metal as a free action to keep that effect going without recasting the spell. So metal is a big part of Divine Caster's repertoire. They need to keep track of it, make sure they use it appropriately to keep useful buffs or healing spells at their maximum efficiency. Each god has their own type of miracles. So Alariel is the goddess of life, so you have spells like the Balance of Nature, Natural Selection, which gives you a boon to adapt it to the environment, Wrath of the Everqueen, which draws upon the goddess's power to lash out with thorny vines and wicked barbs. The Ether Sea, likewise, is all about the sea, so you can dash foes on the rocks with tidal waves. You can use a wave from the Ether Sea to surround you and sweep you up to a new location, and you suffer no effects from any dangerous environments along the way. Cool stuff like that. Grimnir, who is Shattered God of the Dwarden, he has spells that relate to runic empowerments, for example. You can even tunnel between zones in battle, which is pretty awesome. If you can use metal, you can maintain the tunnel so that your allies can use it. Basically allows you to go underneath zones and avoid any enemies or bad stuff in between. Kane, of course, is all about blood, so we get loads of cool blood-related spells. The Red Mist I like. Basically, you make an opposed test against the enemy. If they fail, they take damage, and their blood is ripped from their body through hundreds of tiny cuts, which then additionally makes their zone that creature is in become lightly obscured by a mist of blood. So it's harder for them to then attack you at range, which is awesome. Blood binding is also cool. You can warm the blood to charm somebody, you can chill it to frighten them, or halt it to restrain them, which is a very useful spell. And we've got finally the Miracles of Sigmar, which are all about sort of celestial power. So Bolster Faith, for example, keeps your allies from being charmed or frightened, and you can spend metal to sustain it. Celestial Strike calls down celestial power to wreath your weapon in lightning. So the first time you use your weapon, after that, you will stun a creature until the start of your next turn, which makes them completely vulnerable. So that's your basics of divine casting. Then we move into equipment. One criticism I've heard about the game is that there's not a ton of equipment in it, but there are easily available supplements that make that pretty much non-issue, with loads of cool additional crafting and artifacts that you can chase if you want cool gear. But yeah, there is basically just essential equipment and a few magical items in the main book. Here they give you a background of how trade works, and items have different levels of rarity. Special items are not purchasable, but there's something you need to find through a quest or some other thing. Exotic items are hard to find, and you'll need to have a contact or some other way to get hold of it. The currency, of course, is Aqua Guaranis, which is measured in drops, a file, which is 10 drops, or a sphere, which is 100 drops. And they mention, of course, how a sphere of Aqua Garanis can purify the land in a zone, removing any taint of chaos or other unnatural force. A sphere can also be used to accelerate growth per the Life Bloom spell, or you can consume it to heal your body. Every drop you consume restores 1 toughness. A phial restores 10 toughness and removes 1 condition. And a sphere, which is 100 drops, will restore all toughness, remove all conditions, and clear 1 space on your wound track. But, 100 drops is a bit of cash, so just be careful. Don't go into a deficit there to heal yourself. And then we have weapons and armor. So I gotta say, there's a good selection of weapons in the game. They're all listed here in these handy tables. They make sure to remind you of Sigmarite weapons and armor. So all Sigmarite equipment has this Sigmarite trait. Basically, it means that they're much harder to damage and affect. And then in the tables, you have a wide variety of different melee and range weapons. Note that the damage is always listed as plus S or some number plus S. If it's just plus S, that means the number of successes you roll on your attack roll. If you succeed in damaging the opponent, you'll deal damage with your successes. For the others, it'll be 1 plus however many successes you roll, or 2 plus however many successes you roll. Then they have traits as well. So if the weapon is piercing, for example, you'll go through some armor. If it's subtle, it'll be damage that you can do as a kind of sneak attack if you're in the right position. Cleave means you can hit more than 1 enemy at a time. Rending means you can tear apart armor, all that kind of cool stuff. And similarly, range weapons have varying capacities as well. Some of them have the reload trait, so you need to spend an action to reload them. You got everything from guns to bows to great crossbows, nets, pistols, repeater pistols, rifles, but the guns tend to be loud, which means you can't use them subtly. As soon as you pull the trigger, people are going to know you're there. Armor is really simple. You've got light, medium, heavy, and shields. Light armor gives you 1 armor and has the trait of subtle, so you can still sneak up on people with light armor. With heavy armor, you're allowed, but you get 3 armor. Shield increases your defense by 1 step, so it doesn't add to your armor, it just makes you harder to hit. Then they talk about all the different traits. For example, Cleave, which I mentioned before. Any result of 6 in your attack roll, or each result of 6, deals 1 damage to all other enemies within close range of you. Loud equipment makes a lot of noise, and alerts everyone within long range of your presence. Same with armor with the loud trait. That gives disadvantage on stealth tests. Magical equipment means that it's unaffected by spells and effects that would transmute it. Rend, of course, is damaging to non-magical armor, which is always problematic. And we have Sigmarite. So this is forged from magically infused metal mined in the realm of Azir. So they are particularly resistant to being damaged, destroyed, or altered. So whenever Sigmarite equipment will be targeted by a spell or effect that would transmute it, the equipment is unaffected. Additionally, Sigmarite armor can't be damaged by a weapon with the Rend trait unless the weapon is also magical. Now that's pretty amazing because rending is really annoying and often leads to needing to spend endeavors to fix your armor. So you have other pretty self-explanatory characteristics for your weapons, and then you have a nice list of adventuring gear. So corrosive acids you can throw at people to do damage, adventuring gear, climbing gear, your celestial wings that give you a fly speed of normal, ether sea cloaks which allow you to swim through the air as if underwater, as I mentioned before, and includes your mount if you have a Fangmora mount. Grimoire is used by your spellcaster to store their spells, and there's a huge list of standard adventuring gear along with costs and rarity. Ironbark oil is specific to the Sylvaneth, so you paint it onto a Sylvaneth and it hardens their bark, increasing their armor by 1, but it only lasts for a day, and each pot of ironbark oil contains enough oil for 5 applications. So if you look at the listing, it's an exotic item, so it's actually quite difficult to get hold of, and it costs 90 drops as well. So it's not easy to get that bonus, but if you can get hold of it, very much useful for a Sylvaneth character. A lot of other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Rations. The Sea Dragon Cloak is cool. It increases your defense by 1 step when you're targeted by a ranged attack. Waypipes are interesting. So as I mentioned, you make a soul entertain test to play the waypipes, and then you can walk the spirit paths, which mean you instantly appear at any point within long range. Stalk the realm roots means you disappear into the earth, nobody can see you, and at the start of your next turn you can appear at any point within medium range, and you get a 1-step increase on your melee. That's pretty awesome. Now we've got the Caradron equipment, which is all the cool stuff that the Caradron overlords can make. We got the ether rigs. So the basic ether rig is the standard, and it has 6 etheric power ingots, giving it a power capacity of 6. You can install expanded power supplies or Arcana armor to increase the basic power supply, or the basic armor given by the rig, which is normally 1. So the basic ether rig will have enough power for 1 adventure, usually 3 to 5 game sessions. Then you have to use regular maintenance to resupply and maintain it. And if you don't do that, your capacity will decrease by 1, which may mean that some of your gear stops functioning. So that's something to watch out for. Then we have a cool list of carriage and equipment, which is all really interesting. So Aether engines are sort of back-mounted portable versions of the engines used to keep aloft carriage and cities and ships. So they're the big spheres that we see on the pre-gen character in the starter set. So that gives you a fly speed. Etheric grenades, they're like handheld versions of artillery. So basically you have a few seconds to throw it before it blows up. It has the blast 2 quality and a range of medium, so you can damage a bunch of enemies at once. Etheric lenses give you witch sight and an additional d6 to any mind awareness tests. Ethermatic saws, you can use them to quickly cut off damaged bits of a ship, or you can use them to cut through enemies. Ethermite hammers, they take the destructive force of a warhammer and use mechanics and pistons for spectacular impact, but they're so heavy that you need an engine harness to even wield them. Arcanaut armor, as we mentioned, gives you an additional 1 armor. Then you got your drill launcher, which we saw is a useful handheld drill cannon that can be used as a projectile, basically. Bores into an enemy, dealing 2+S damage, and then detonates, dealing 2 damage to every creature in the zone, including the original target. You can also use it as a melee weapon. However, replacement heads, you have to build them or buy them, so it's not the cheapest thing to use. Engine harness allows you to get +1 to your body and use one of the massive Ethermite hammers. Then you got cool stuff like grapnel launchers, so you can grapple onto things. You got skyhooks, which is an ether-powered harpoon, and you can pull enemies towards you. You got quad breathers, which make you immune to airborne poisons, toxins, or illnesses. You got rapid fire rivet guns, sky mines, which are great to release behind you while you're flying through the air and attacking. You got vulcanizer pistols that can reduce armor to slag. Some sample rigs with sample loadouts for ether chemists, engine masters, engine riggers, and sky wardens, which is super helpful for beginners. Then we got our fire slayer runes, which, as I said, are really, really powerful. You can have a number of active runes equal to your soul stat, and the effects are cumulative, so they are awakened in battle and activate when determining initiative. If you're surprised, you don't get the benefit of your rune, so keep that in mind. The Rune of Awakened Steel gives the rend trait to all your weapons, super annoying for your opponents. Farsight gives you accuracy and increase of 1 step. Fire Determination gives you 1 additional space on the wound track. Fury gives you a 1 step increase in melee. Iron Skin gives you an additional armor of 1. Rune of Relentless Zeal gives you a bonus to initiative equal to your soul stat. And finally, Searing Heat will give you +1 damage to all your attacks. Then you get some goods and services you can buy, things like, buying a pony or barding, coach passage, war horses, sailing ships for 90,000 drops, food and lodging, which is handy when you're traveling from city to city. Services, including the infirmary, which is helpful if you don't have a good medic in the party. They'll give you the ability to heal up wounds. You can also hire people as hirelings and have NPCs that follow you around and aid you in certain ways, like cooks that will make you warm meals with the talent, a hunter that uses the hunter talent, a medic that can do medics a maximum of 2 consecutive nights before they need rest. You get mercenary veterans. You can get scouts who will inspect an area before reporting back. Then for travel, you might want to have certain types of tools and kits as well. Cooking utensils for making meals, disguise kits for disguising yourself, engineer's tools for repairing and the engineering endeavor, chemist kit for the Aethercraft endeavor, smith tools for the forge, urgold, ground tug, and repair equipment endeavors, and finally surgical instruments, which reduces the complexity of medic talent tests. Then we get the rules. So basically, the main thing you need to know here is that every roll, as you've seen so far, is written out as DNX:Y. So X is the difficulty, which is the number you need to roll on each D6 to call it a success, and Y is the complexity or the number of successes. So a DN4:2, body dexterity, means you make a dice pool of body plus dexterity. Skill, for each roll you get 4 or above, will be a success, and you need 2 successes to pass the test. Meanwhile, a DN34 mind channeling, you use mind plus channeling for your pool, and you need 3 or above to succeed, but you need 4 of those to pass the test. Opposed tests are you against another person, and it gives you some tips here about, difficulty. So that's the overall hardness of the task, and complexity is how involved and complicated it is. And they give some hot tips here on when to roll or not to roll. I think, as in most games that are, a bit more free and easy with rules like this and using range bands and stuff, you don't particularly want to get rolls happening every 5 seconds. If something is interesting to fail, then have them roll it. If failure is not interesting, then just say you just do it and move on. So then they give a common explanation for difficulty numbers. So a 6, which means you need a 6 for success, is very hard. They give you an example of what that would look like. So opposed tests are a little bit different. So you have an assumed difficulty of DN4:1, but then you can have advantage or disadvantage. So if you have advantage in an opposed test, then it reduces your difficulty for success to 3. If you have disadvantage, difficulties increase by 1 to 5. You can also have greater advantage and greater disadvantage, which decreases difficulty by 2, but those are rare. If for some reason you end up at a point where you would actually have to go over 6, then you would increase the complexity instead. Then they talk about the natural awareness thing, which I mentioned before already. So, and they give you a sidebar on when you can adjudicate automatic successes. So you could work out the dice pool and multiply the complexity by the difficulty. If the dice pool is greater than the total, then they automatically succeed. That's one way to do it. Or you can just use your good judgment, if it's interesting or not to roll. Extended tests are where you can make a certain number of test attempts and you need to achieve a certain number of successes for the DN that's been applied in order to succeed. And these are usually what you do during an endeavor, right? So you'll get a certain number of tests, and if you get enough successes over the course of that number of tests, you'll pass and complete the task. If you get 1 or 2 more than the DN, you'll get an extra benefit. So maybe you'll get additional information, get a bonus die, or whatever. If you get 3 more than the DN, you get a major benefit. So you could complete it quicker than expected. Maybe you get to do another endeavor. You could uncover some lost or secret information or gain some kind of boon to a future task. Then they talk about metal. So it's equal to your soul divided by 2, rounded up, remember. But you always recover 1 metal at the start of your turn up to your maximum during combat. So they want you to spend metal a lot. Certain factors like spells and talents can increase or decrease your maximum metal. And as we saw, metal is particularly important to divine casters, but you can also use it to take extra actions in combat. And you can use any of the actions listed in the actions section. There are quite a few of those. Some talents also require the use of metal, or you can use metal to give them a bonus of some kind. Then we turn to Soulfire and Doom. These are the shared party resources. So Soulfire, if you use a point and everybody agrees, then you can go ahead and count every die in your dice pool as a 6. Basically, so you get the maximum possible result. Or if it's after a test and it really sucked, you can say, I want to spend a Soulfire, everybody agrees. You can re-roll as many dice as you like and re-attempt the test. You can recover all your toughness, you can recover all spent metal, or you can cheat death, allowing you to recover from being mortally wounded. However, if you use Soulfire without party consent, you do it anyway, then you'll increase the number on the Doom track by 1. So that reflects you drawing on the spirit of your unwilling allies. So don't do that. It's generally a bad thing. Then it gives you examples of, how to use each of the different aspects in tracking Soulfire. So the maximum Soulfire is equal to the number of player characters minus any Stormcast Eternals who don't contribute. If a character leaves the binding, your maximum Soulfire decreases accordingly. If a new character comes in, you increase the maximum Soulfire, and you can track the Soulfire on the party sheet. But they recommend using the tokens, of course, because I want to say the starter set. Recovering Soulfire, you can do a short-term party goal to recover 1. If you achieve a long-term goal, you get all your Soulfire back. If you increase your maximum Soulfire, like by getting a new member of your binding, then you recover all Soulfire. If a member of the binding takes the recuperate endeavor, you recover 1 Soulfire. If the binding as a whole takes the bond endeavor, you recover all your Soulfire. And if a party makes a last stand at death, the moment of death, then you recover all Soulfire because you're inspired by their sacrifice. Now, Doom is the flip side of Soulfire. So as I mentioned, if you use it without consent of your party, the Doom goes up, but Doom will go up for other reasons as well. As fears escalate to threats and bad things happen in the mortal realms, Doom will go up, and that will then give some creatures additional advantages in combat because they'll have certain abilities and effects that are linked to the level of Doom in the world. And it allows the GM to kind of gauge the general state of the world. So if Doom is high, people are living on a knife edge, there's lots of violence in the streets and panic and so forth. If Doom is low, then things are relatively calm, but never completely so. Doom never goes below 1, remember. So increasing Doom happens if a party member dies, a party member flees, if a party member fails a retreat. If a fear escalates to a threat, Doom increases by 1 as well. But you can decrease it by increasing your maximum Soulfire. If the party takes the Cleanse Corruption endeavor, you can decrease the Doom by 1. If your Stormcast Eternal party member is reforged, then you decrease the Doom by 1 as well. And if the party stop a threat, which would have added 1 to the Doom, then the Doom will go back down by 1 if you take care of the threat. Then we get into combat, which is really pretty straightforward and fun, but there's tons of actions and lots of interesting things you can do. So it's a nice balance for me. Everybody has a turn during a round, and the turn order is determined by initiative. If players have the same initiative value, they decide at the start of combat who acts first if they're both player characters. Then they act in that order for the rest of the battle. If it's a player character and an enemy with the same initiative, the player character always goes first. If it's 2 NPCs that have the same initiative, the GM decides which goes first and sticks with that order for the rest of the battle. Alternatively, the combatants can make an opposed mind awareness test to see who acts first first if you can't come to an agreement. You can also have surprise rounds. So if you wait in the bushes and raid somebody, ambush, then you get a surprise round. But during that surprise round, you can only take a single action, and you can't use metal except to fuel talents or abilities. But you can't use it to take additional actions, and you can't use it to double your training or focus, which is another thing you can use metal for. So that you get the advantage of a initial attack with no opposition, but you're not going to be able to spend your metal to the max during that surprise round. So during your turn, you get to make a move depending on your speed, and then you get to take an action. And some things are free action, like drinking an elixir, moving anywhere in your zone that you're already in, reloading a gun, stuff like that. They recommend, of course, that you don't just say "I attack," but try and be evocative and describe how you direct yourself in combat, what you're doing, how your character feels, what they're specifically doing with their awesome weapons and spells. And they talk about zones. So exact positioning is not really important in this game. They give an example here of how you can divide a big combat area into different zones, and each of those zones has some little characteristics. So zone 1, it has a bridge on the near side. Zone 2 has a ravine with a major hazard of lava underneath, which would do a lot of damage if you fell into it. Zone 5 has a ruined fortress that gives you cover, partial cover in zone 4 with decaying trees. So, they advise that, you add some interesting things to the zone, so that positioning in your zone does matter, but that, you're not worried about individual squares like in D&D or Pathfinder or whatever. They also talk about cover, which basically, if you are hiding in partial cover, you have advantage on opposed test to be detected. Total cover increases your defense by 2 steps when targeted by range attacks, whereas partial cover increases your defense by 1 step. Additionally, creatures hiding in a zone with a total cover trait have greater advantage on opposed tests to remain unseen, so they get +2. So then talk about different speeds of movement, which are, you get slowed down by difficult terrain, basically. You can have different levels of hazards, minor, major, and deadly. Minor does 1 damage to you per turn that you're in the hazard. Major hazard causes serious injury and you get 3 damage per turn. Deadly hazards cause 5 damage per turn, so that's really bad. There also might be interactive objects in your zone, like doors, windows, levers, torches, whatever. So, that could add additional traits to the zone if you do something with those interactive objects. Talk about the different kinds of obscured, lightly obscured, and heavily obscured. So a lightly obscured zone, any tests that rely on sight are increased by 1, and opposed mind awareness tests are made at disadvantage. Any creature making an opposed test to see a creature in the zone is disadvantaged as well. Any creature in a heavily obscured zone is effectively... They talk about the different ranges for ranged attacks and how you can move in combat. You can break up your movement in different ways. So you can move within your zone to move to a target and make an attack, then use your movement to move to an adjacent zone, and then spend a metal to make another attack, or take a run action to move to another zone. So you can do lots of stuff, especially if you've got metal to spend. And they talk about different speeds. So normal is the assumed for all player characters, basically. You can use a free action to move anywhere within your zone, which is short range, or use their move to move to an adjacent zone at medium range. Fast means you can move anywhere within your current zone for a free action. It can use your move to move 2 zones away. Slow, you basically have to use a run action to move to an adjacent zone. So you can still move within your current zone, but you need to spend a move for that. So that's pretty rough. Other kinds of movement, you can be prone for a free action, but if you're knocked prone, you have to use a move to stand back up again. Unless you want to crawl, which you can do, but you're obviously at slow speed. You can do jumping as well, flying, falling, all sorts of stuff. Mounts, there's a few things about mounted combat here. So dismounting is a free action. Use the mount speed in place of your own, obviously, if you're on it. If you're knocked prone, you can try to leap from your mount's back and land on your feet instead of falling on your ass. So there's some cool stuff like that. There's a bit about vehicles here, but there's a whole book on vehicle combat, Steam and Steel, which is much more in-depth on that. It's very cool. We'll look at that in a future video. And then we have a list of all your possible actions, and I won't go through all of them, but just to give you some examples, you have your standard attacks and your charge, where you get plus 1d6 to your dice pool for your attack, but your defense is reduced 1 step. So you're kind of neglecting your defense to just charge in there and get a good shot in. I really like the called shot. The way they implement this is very clever. So if you want to hit somebody in the head, their defense goes up by 2 to represent the hardness of the head as a target. But if you succeed, they get stunned until the end of the next turn, which is pretty cool. Likewise, if you attack the arms, the defense increases by 1 step instead of 2, but if you succeed, the target will drop an item they're carrying, which could be a weapon or shield. That would make them more open to future attacks. Finally, you can attack the legs, and if you succeed, they will be knocked prone, making them more liable to future attacks as well. You can also dodge to avoid harm, you can flee, you can grapple somebody and try to restrain them, you can help your allies, you can try to hide using a stealth test, you do something improvised with a negotiation with the GM, you can parlay to try try and distract people or convince them with your voice and your leadership. You can react, which is basically delaying your action until a certain trigger event occurs. You can retreat as a party. You can run to move to an adjacent zone at any point within medium range. Then you have search, so you can look around your surroundings looking for a clue or looking for an enemy that you can't see anymore. You can seize the initiative. You don't act on your current turn, but you go to the top of the order at your next turn. You can shove people to try and push them away from you and maybe even into a hazard or something like that. You can use objects, you can use a talent, and then they talk about how you make an attack. So this is pretty important stuff, but very simple once you get used to it. So you compare your where you are on the ladder, given your rating, with your opponent. And the way the character sheet is laid out, you can easily see how many steps higher or lower you are than the opponent. So the higher you are, the lower your difficulty number, and the higher they are, the higher the difficulty number is for your attacks. And, they'll make the same calculations in return. If you're really superb at melee and your opponent is really crap in their defense, then it'll be very easy for you to hit them. Makes total sense, right? It's really easy to figure out in the moment. The same effectively works for range attacks, but then you're looking at accuracy rather than your melee's total. And you'll need to make sure, of course, that your target is within range. So ranged weapons at close range is difficult, but there are talents that you can use to avoid that, so it's not always the case. You can also use a ranged weapon as an improvised weapon for a melee attack, like bonking somebody with the butt of your gun. There's rules for dual wielding with both melee and ranged weapons, so there's a bit of info about that, which we won't go into, but it's a lot of fun. And of course, we saw there are talents that apply to, for example, attacking with 2 ranged weapons. You actually get a bonus to your accuracy when using 2 ranged weapons at once. Then dealing damage, so it's important to know that procedure as well. So if the attack is successful, then you deal damage. So the target will reduce their toughness by the total damage minus whatever their armor score is. If the target's toughness is then reduced to 0, any leftover damage is converted to wounds. If the target has no spaces remaining for wounds, they are then mortally wounded. Most characters' toughness is body plus mind plus soul, but some enemies have double that number for their toughness because they are particularly hardcore. And there are 3 types of wounds you can get. So if your toughness is 0 and you take 1 damage, you get a minor wound and you lose 1 space in the wound track. If your toughness is 0 and you take 2 to 4 damage, you get 2 spaces filled on your wound track, and that's a serious wound. A deadly wound is if you suffer 5 or more damage from a single source when your toughness is 0. That fills 3 spaces on the wound track. And so you need to know the seriousness of the wounds that you've suffered for your allies who might try to heal you with medic skills and stuff like that. If you're mortally wounded, then you fill up all your remaining spaces on the wound track. You are stunned. You can't recover toughness, and you must make a death test. So again, you need to track what kind of wound put you into that state, because the difficulty number of your death test depends on what the last wound you suffered was that put you into the mortally wounded state. If you succeed, you cling to life. You're no longer mortally wounded. You're not stunned anymore, but your toughness is still at 0 and your wound track is still full. So if anybody hits you again, you'll immediately go back into mortally wounded. If you fail, the DN of the death test will increase by 1, but it could never go above 6. If it would go above 6, then you die. So that typically means if you fail a death test 3 times, you die, which is much like D&D. If you suffer damage while you're mortally wounded, then the complexity of the death test increased by 1. So, that could be really bad if you just hit a deadly wound and your opponent hits you again while you're mortally wounded. Maybe you end up with needing 6 successes or something stupid. Allies, however, can help you. So you or a member of the soul binding can spend a soul fire to cheat death. An ally can use a mind medicine test to help you, bring you back to 1 toughness and no longer mortally wounded. Or you can drink a spear's worth of aqua and that'll take you out of the mortally wounded state, recover all your toughness, and clear 1 space on your wound track. Or an ally within close range can use an action to do the same thing, give you their aqua. Finally, if you want to, you can do a last stand when you're mortally wounded. So you declare so at the start of your turn, and then you are no longer stunned. You remove any condition you have. You refill your metal to max. You're immune to all damage, including environment stuff and hazard stuff. Your melee and accuracy increase 1 step, and all your damage ignores armor. But then at the end of your turn, you die. But as a result of your heroic death, all the binding soul fire refills to its maximum, as your allies are bolstered by your sacrifice. And you don't increase doom as would be normal during a death. Then you can take a breather after a battle, so you sit for 10 minutes and you replenish all your toughness. If you take a proper rest for 8 hours, then your toughness returns to max and you get 1 cleared space on the wound track. And between adventures, you can recover all wounds as well. That naturally leads us into the between adventure stuff, which I love. So these are all the endeavors you can do. So there's ethercraft or engineering. So you need to have the right talents for these, the right kits and materials. Then you can choose the devices listed on page 112. And if you have the right materials, you do an extended test. And over 1 week, you make 3 tests to create the device. And if you succeed, you've created that device and you can then attach that to your rig and use it. If you don't complete the test, you have a number of options. You can keep trying if you have another week of downtime, but you only can do that up to 3 weeks, so nine total tests. You can give up and discard the unfinished device and then sell the materials for half the value you bought them for, or you can finish it later, so you can store it somewhere with an ally or at a workshop or something. Note how many successes you achieved so far, and then when you go back to it, you can start from where you left off. The bond endeavor, which bonds the relationships between your binding. This endeavor must be taken by the whole binding, excluding the Stormcast Eternal characters, and that gives the binding back all their soulfire. Also, the binding can use Cleanse Corruption. It has to be the whole binding, excluding any Stormcast, and then you reduce Doom, so you reduce it by 1 to a minimum of 1. You can use an endeavor to make contacts, which could be useful connections in nearby cities or stuff like that. You can take the endeavor multiple times, creating a new contact each time or strengthening an existing contact. And then if you strengthen the contact, you get advantage on convincing them to do stuff to assist you or the party. If you have a contact that could help you with an endeavor, such as a smith helping you with repair equipment, their help grants 2 successes to your total number of successes for any extended test. So it's another reason to get some hirelings and help on board for stuff like that. If you are skilled in the arcane arts, you can also create spells, which is really cool, and you can use the rules for that later in the book. You can also create witch brew if you're blessed of Cain. So use blood brew that when consumed drives the imbiber into a blood frenzy. So they get 1 step up in melee for the duration of the combat, and they don't become stunned when they're mortally wounded. You can do false identity if you have the Master of Disguise talent, so you have a false identity you can use at any time. You can forge Urgold runes if you have the Zargrim talent and the appropriate materials and tools. You can forsake your god and choose a different one, but that might make your god unhappy. You can do Gruntog, which is the ritual by which you hammer Urgold runes into your body. But remember, you can only have as many runes in your body as you have soul stat. You can also learn a spell with an endeavor if you have a spellcasting talent. You can either pick a common spell, a spell of a lord that you know. So this is different from, making an original spell with the create spell endeavor. This is learning a spell from the book's core list. You can also look for lost lore, which might be useful information if you're on the trail of something important. You can do magical weapon weave. If you have the weapon weave talent, you can take a weapon and enhance it with an additional trait. You can give it penetrating, reach, restraining, or rend. Rend being so annoying, you need 10 successes to get that one. A good balancing act, I feel. Recuperate, basically, you can take that individually to recover 1 soulfire for the binding. Regular maintenance, we saw that for the ether rigs of the Cardron need maintenance, and basically between adventures you need to do this or some of your equipment won't work because you'll have 1 less power. You can repair equipment as well, so the difficulty number of the extended test or the complexity particularly will vary depending on how heavy the armor is or the type of weapon that you're seeking to repair. If you're a Stormcast Eternal, you can try and learn something about your past life to learn more about yourself, which could be useful or potentially troubling. So not always positive, I would imagine. You can go shopping to buy some stuff. You can train your companion. If you've got a loyal companion talent, you do a soul beast handling extended test. You can teach the companion training or focus in a new skill. You can level up their skill for all the way up to 3, potentially, if they're already at 2. If your companion unfortunately died in your adventure, you can take this endeavor to bond with a new companion. So then we have all this background stuff, all about the mortal realms. So basically, you've got Azir, the realm of heaven. That's where the god king Sigmar retreated to during the Age of Chaos. Then we have Akshai, the realm of fire, Chamon, the realm of metal, Gur, the realm of beasts, Kiran, the realm of life, Haish, the realm of light, Shaiish, the realm of death, and Ulgu, the realm of shadow. I'm not going to go too much into the details here. They tell you about realm gates, which is important. These are portals between the different mortal realms, which you'll often need to make use of. They talk about the spread of civilization in the wake of the Stormcast Eternals and Sigmar pushing back some of the Chaos forces. Then we have the Necroquake, which has brought another new threat to the poor people living in the mortal realms. Life in the realms in general is outlined, and it is not super fun in general. There are entertainments and playhouses and theaters and stuff, but basic survival is what most people are after. Traveling anywhere is really dangerous, even at the best of times. And then we talk about the individual realms. So each of them gets some background, like Azir, Akshai, which is where the default setting is of the Great Parch. But remember, each of these realms is supposed to be effectively an infinite plane of existence, so you could create any kind of thing you want. Each of these realms also gives you an adventure hook as well, if you want to give your characters a reason to go there. Talks a little bit about key locations and why people might travel there, which is cool as well. Gur, the realm of beasts, is quite interesting. This is where you're either the feaster or the feast, and often both. It's a land of hunting, lots of dangerous situations anyway, including a lot of orcs. However, now since the Necroquake, it's even more dangerous because there were so many corpses there already that have now risen from the dead as well, so it's an even more dangerous place than usual, which I like. Giran is the realm of life, very verdant and green. It's the realm of Ilariel and the Sylvaneth, so it's a great place for them to hang out. But while the Necroquake did wash over Giran as it did everywhere, it's harder for the undead to survive in Giran. Corporeal undead tend to swiftly join the mulch and subsume back into the cycles of life. The living spells of Giran, though, are a menace most fervently hope to avoid. We've got the realm of light, so this is kind of living in eternal opposition to the realm of Ulgu, which is the realm of shadow. And we have the realm of death, Shaish, which is where Nagash lives. So he created his greatest black pyramid at the very heart of the realm of death. He tried to make this ritual to take over everything, and it all got screwed up by the Skaven and a touch of chaos, and so the Necroquake happened, or at least that's how I understand it. But the Shaish Nadir every day is pulling more people into his deadly grasp, so gotta watch out for that. Ulgu, the Realm of Shadow, is where we get some of the darker archetypes from the elves in the archetype chapter. There's some really interesting stuff happening there, but it's a place of secrets and lies where the rules of logic hold little sway, so it's not the easiest place to survive, and the Daughters of Cain make their living there, so you gotta be very careful of that. Then you have the Realm of Chaos. This is an infernal plane of demons and dark gods. Each of the dark gods has their own dominion, so you've got the largest is that claimed by the blood god Khorne, sitting on his skull throne, of course. Then you have the Garden of Nurgle, Tzeentch the Changer of Ways in his crystal labyrinth. We have Slaanesh's realm with a giant pleasure palace at the center of which is a sumptuously gilded and empty throne. And the Horned Rat god, too, has its stronghold in the realm of chaos in Blight City, which is totally infested by the verminous Skaven. And in between you have horrible wastelands of darkness and horror. Hooray. Then we go through some organizations and factions that weren't covered by the main archetypes. So the Dispossessed, so the remnants of the Duarden that were shattered during the Age of Chaos, the Free Guild, common folk who tried to protect themselves against the onslaught of monstrous and demonic forces. You got Wanderers, who were nomadic elves that were the remnants of fallen elven kingdoms of Giran. All sorts of stuff, interesting people like that you might meet in your travels. Then we've got the more significant factions that players can be a part of, like the Collegiate Arcane, who are obviously focused on magic, the Darkling Covens, the matriarchal cults, focused on the acquisition of power and influence, the Daughters of Cain, who love blood and ritualized murder, so I'll watch out for them. The Devoted of Sigmar, who are guided by faith and fanaticism. The Free Peoples, who we talked about a little bit earlier. So they're varied and are not necessarily tied to specific species as well. We've got the Fire Slayers, the Ferocious Duarden. Then we have the Idrinath Deepkin, who we know are very reclusive and hang out beneath the depths. We've got the Caradhran Overlords, who love their engineering and were very enterprising and took to the sky to avoid the Scourge of the Age of Chaos. And then we've got the Scourge Privateers as well. These are Elven Corsairs. So they used to be the pirates of all pirates, and now they focus more on taking on the colossal beasts, both sea and land monsters, and taking in bounties for these guys. You got the Stormcast Eternals, who we know are not human in a traditional sense, but they are the sort of embodiment of Sigmar's will, forged into violent power. You got the Sylvaneth, the children of Ilariel, who of course are closely connected to nature and the magic of life. Then we talk about the Great Parch. So this, we saw a bit of it in the starter set around the city of Brightspear. There's a lot more to the Great Parch, and I won't spoil it for you here. There's lots of cool info in here for GMs and some background stuff to help roleplay if you are playing a local. And they zoom in on each area to give you a better idea of the specific regions, like Iridian, which is this part up here. They talk about key land features and, the cities of each area. So Asperia is where Brightspear is located. That's where we were in the starter set. We learned a little bit about the surrounding area in there as well, but we just get broader coverage in the core rulebook. So we see much more of other parts of this part of Akshay. So, the floating city as well. Flame Spider Woad, Land of Dark Pacts, totally different regions like Capillaria. We've got this creepy eye over here, the Skull Pile, which I don't even want to know about, the Heartblood Sea, which again sounds horrifying. Lots of scary stuff. Eastern Parch, we have a Skaven Undercity out there, so they've made their own outpost as well. We've got the Flame Scar Plateau, which is where you'll find Anvilgard. That's, of course, a major location. It's expanded in the one of the printed campaigns. We've got Golvaria around the city of Hallowheart and the castle Drakesbane, along with the Skyheim Peaks and the Vale of Cursed Beasts. Castle Drakesbane is pictured here. It looks amazing. We've got Cool's Ravage and Tempest's Eye rising from the summit of the mighty Titan Spear Mountain. And here's Cool's Ravage here, and Tempest's Eye in the Flamespire Mountains. The Obsidian Fortress in Fort Ignis. Then we've got this area here. We've got an eternally burning forest on the edge of Vitrolia. Some more cities here as well. And then we get into the religion and beliefs. So we have Pantheon of Order, which was Sigmar and his allies and the gods of chaos. And it just talks a bit about each god and the main strictures of their faith. So we have our main man Sigmar, Nagash the Undying King, who's a champion of death. We have Lariel the Everqueen, who looks beautiful there in this image. It's all about respecting the natural order. Gorkamorka, which is the god of the greenskins. Followers of Gorkamorka debate whether he is brutal and cunning or cunning but brutal. I find that quite amusing. Grimnir, the Shattered God, who is worshipped by the Duarden. And then Grugni, the Maker, who is worshipped by those who are builders amongst the Duarden. Malerian, the Shadow King, is worshipped as a absolute monarch and god throughout Ulgu. Morathi, the High Oracle of Cain. So the Witch Elves of Cain are widely regarded as some of the most fanatically loyal followers in all the mortal realms. Again, everything with Cain is about blood, and Morathi is kind of the avatar of that aspect. We have Teclis, the Illuminator, a mage without compare, also known as the Illuminator. His strictures are all about pursuing knowledge, never turning away from wisdom or those who seek wisdom, resisting chaos through proper learning. Then we get into the Chaos Gods themselves. Khorne, of course, is all about blood for the blood gods, skull for the skull throne, show no mercy, hold in scorn the weak. Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it does so. Nice. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, who loves spreading diseases and decay, and basically Tzeentch's followers should be in particular forced to deal with the benefits of Nurgle and his plagues. Slaanesh is all about sensation and pleasure and desire. He disdains the mindless destruction wrought by Khorne. Tzeentch is the changer of the ways, so there's no hard set rules because Tzeentch is all about changing, but they do tend to be extremely interested in magic, despite their unpredictability. And then we have the Great Horned Rat, the god of the Skaven, the Vermin King. So the way that the Great Horned Rat is worshipped varies a lot, but it generally revolves around selfishness, ambition, and expanding Skavendom, as well as maintaining a healthy terror of the Great Horned Rat itself. There are also really great big beasts called God Beasts that used to be around in the Age of Sigmar. Some people believe they're still around, but, we're not really sure about that. Then there are the Chosen, so these are kind of demigods that appear and are tied to certain gods as well. Then we have our magic. So again, we have a bunch of different lores of magic. So Realmstone is kind of the raw magical energy of the mortal realms coalesce into a physical form. So we have the different Realmstones for the 8 realms. Then we have Warpstone of Chaos. It's solidified chaos and one of the most dangerous of all Realmstones. And then we have Veronite, which is corruption in liquid form, suffused with raw chaos energy and the blood of the slain. That's incredibly dangerous, and the fluid resembles red-hot gore. And if you make weapons out of it, they're exceedingly deadly. So there you go. Now, since the return of some kind of civilization to the realms, there's been sort of resurgence of magic, but it also means there's been some side effects, like the appearance of deadly phenomena like the endless spells. There was one of those in the starter set where basically, they're horribly difficult to survive if you happen to run into one or summon one by mistake. They give you the outlines of how to cast a spell, which is basically a mind channeling test. The difficulty will be given with the spell. And then if you get extra successes, you can usually use those extra successes to overcast a spell, meaning you can gain some additional benefits for additional successes. If you're casting a spell in a realm that aligns with your magical lore, like if you're aligned to Jade and you cast your spell in Giran, you'll get an additional 1d6 to your test automatically. You can also share spellcasting with another spellcaster and work together. So you add 1d6 to your dice pool, plus 1d6 per level of training and channeling the assisting caster has. And if the casters both share a lore of magic, you can add another 1d6 to the dice pool. Sharing spellcasting can be really helpful if you want to really make sure a spell goes off. But there is a price to failing a spell test. If you only fail by 1 to 3 successes, which would be pretty typical, you suffer 1d6 damage from erupting magical energy. 4 to 8, you get the opposite effect from what you wanted. And it keeps getting worse all the way up to 18 plus, where you accidentally summon an endless spell, which usually means mass death. So you don't want to do that. We have some common spells that can be used by anybody. These are things like creating arcane shields, arcane blasts and bolts, moving objects, creating a bit of light on the subject, mystic shields, stuff like that. Then you have your lore specific spells. So Amber is about bestial things in hunting. So you have, bestial spirit, you can add talents, you can change into wild forms, to a willing creature. Amethyst spells are all about death, so you can shroud yourselves in deathly cold, and basically the target of the spell is incapacitated and appears dead. You can summon ethereal guides, you can speak to the dead, all this kind of stuff. Bright spells are the opposite. You can blow people up with fireballs, you can cleanse things with white hot flames, you can regenerate yourself as if a phoenix from the ashes, you can summon phoenix spirits, you can wreathe your weapons in fire. Celestial spells are all about the heavens and the skies, so you get favorable winds, chain lightning, healing light from the skies. You can perform ritual to seek prophecy and ask the GM a single question. You can purify things with a blast of radiant energy. Gold spells are about metal, so they allow you to transmute materials, but as we know, if the metal is magical or Sigmarite, probably won't work. But you can also turn common weapons into crappy materials, or you can transmute people's weapons into lead, make them super heavy and hard to use, which is a lot of fun. Gray spells, these are about shadow and illusion. You'll find these, with spellcasters linked to that mortal realm. You can asphyxiate people, enslave them, create illusions, mystifying miasmas, summon steeds made of shadow. Jade spells, you'll get things like saturating area with deadly briars. You can cause life to bloom. So accelerating growth, creating a month's worth of harvest in a day, which is pretty awesome. And note that every spell, of course, has some kind of overcast ability. So if you do Realm Blood, you'll revitalize yourself and an ally within long range and regain 1 toughness. But for every additional success, they gain 1 more toughness. And virtually every spell has an overcast effect for additional successes. Then we have light spells. So you can cast etheric nets to restrain somebody in beams of light. Clarity to guide your thoughts and get bonuses on mind tests. Healing glows to knit your allies' injuries back together. You can empower your allies with the light of battle. You can seal enemies in a crystal prison, which is pretty awesome. You can set off a solar flare to blind a bunch of targets in your zone. And you have spells of the deeps. These are for the Edenith Deepkin, so you can create inky tendrils of darkness. Cloying Sea Mist, which is a great spell, so basically it's an opposed test, and anybody who fails becomes incapacitated, which means they're really vulnerable, and you get 1 additional round of incapacitation per additional success, which is great. You can also make people forget things by drifting into the minds of others and plucking out memories. You can engulf your enemies in pressure of the deep sea. You can summon the ether sea and cause things to become difficult terrain. Lots of interesting stuff. You can create tides of fear within medium range. Then you have an example endless spell, the Purple Sun of Shaiish, which is a skull-faced orb that shoots death energy all over the place. Basically, if you succeed on a DN 5 Soul Fortitude test, you'll still suffer 10 damage and be frightened while in the same zone as the Purple Sun. On a failure, you immediately die and crystallize into amethyst as the soul is ripped from your body. Then they have the rules for creating a new spell, which is really nice and easy. There's 5 steps to that. You define the aspects of the spell. So major aspects, they're listed out here nicely in this table. They have a different cost associated with them. Minor aspects help put more definition and shape onto your spell. So that's things like target, range, and duration. Then you determine the difficulty number, so you add up the total aspects. If the total is 6 or less, the complexity is 1, but if the total is over 6, then you'll add to the complexity. You just have to split complexity and difficulty so they add up to the total aspect cost, but you can decide how that split works. Then you'll have to work out how to resist the spell effects. So it could be that you work out with the GM what opposed test would make the most sense, for example. Then you work out what the overcast effect should be. So that should be generally obvious depending on what the outcome of the spell generally is. Then you want to give it a name, decide which lore it fits in, and write a description. So it's really awesome. I mean, the spell system is straightforward enough that you can create a lot of your own spells, but they give you quite a few in each lore to start with. And of course, there are more in other books as well. Then we got your typical GM section, which is nothing that special, but it works well enough. It advises you to do session 0 to talk about your tone, the theme, and what kind of party you want to run. There's a handy chart for difficulty by the size of the dice pool and the DN that you're setting. How to make a game feel like it's set in the Age of Sigmar, using Doom and using themes of the setting and your quests and adventures. How to deal with rumors, fears, and threats, creating memorable locations and decisions that matter, and rules for group tests. If you want to have grim and perilous campaigns where you're less powerful, there's rules for that as well. If you want to make it more like Warhammer Fantasy, but in that case, I I'd say just play Warhammer Fantasy. There's also some alternate rules if you want things to be more heroic, if you want to have, random initiative. So you roll 2d6 and add your initiative bonus. So generally, if you have high initiative, you'll be better, but there's still a chance that you can get a lucky roll and have a better initiative if your initiative is crappy. So some people like that. I prefer to just use the initiative and make things faster that way, basically. You can also have rules for spontaneous spellcasting, casting unknown spells from different lores or multiple spells. And then we've got bestiary. So you've got a nice explanation. All the bestiary entries are laid out the same. You've got the creature's name, the size, type, and subfaction and role. Then you've got their melee, accuracy, and defense, along with their armor, toughness, wounds, and metal, if appropriate. In section 4, you have speed, initiative, natural awareness, and any skills. Then you have any traits, which will give them special abilities and talents and so forth. In 6, there's a list of the attacks the creature can do. And then finally, the mind, body, and soul of the creature. And every stat block will look like that. So, as with the character sheets, it's really super elegant. And so we start off with some stat blocks for basic random people that you might meet in Sigmar, like free guild guards, wanderers, cogsmiths, who are engineers, pets and mounts like bittergrubs, cats, dappled ifrits, the fangmora eel, griff hounds, griff chargers with a little fluffy Mustori, horses, quiverlings, scryfish, the star eagle for your flying types, monstrous beasts. These are things that you'll want to fight. Notice that you have a big jump in their body and fighting abilities as you get into individual beasts that you want to fight. So the Arachnarok spider is enormous, with great fighting skill, 18 wounds. It can ambush you by dropping from the ceiling if you don't know where it is. It can skitter along the walls, and it has a rending attack, which rolls 8d6, and it can poison you as well. So that's not great. Then we got super huge, dangerous stuff like magma droths, chosen mounts of high-ranking fire slayers. They can breathe fire at you, and they're immune to fire themselves. They also have volcanic blood. So if you damage them, they damage you with their boiling lava blood. They also have blazing maw attacks, rending claws that also do slashing damage, and crushing tail damage that can knock you prone. You got the maw crusher, which are often kind of brutish imitations of true dragons that are ridden by orcs. They have mighty fists, slashing tails, inward busting bellows, so they can damage you by shouting really loud. That's pretty cool. Then we got some disciples of the dark gods, like the Chaos Sorcerer Lord. Got a dark shroud around them, so their defense increases 1 step for each point of doom. And they also have some spellcasting, including a unique spell called Demonic Power. Got some specific enemies for specific dark gods. For the Blades of Corn, we got Blood Reavers, Blood Warriors, Flesh Hounds, Bloodletters, Blood Reapers, and Korgoraths. Getting bigger and bigger, right? We got a body of 7 there. And I love their one trait is Skull Taker. They can use an action to devour the skull of a mortally wounded creature, killing them instantly. So, skulls for the skull's throne. What do? Disciples of Tzinch. So we have pink horrors and blue horrors. We see flowing along in a horde here. Brimstone horrors, who are tiny demons that swarm together. Kyric acolytes, who use arcane bolts and cursed blades. Volshark, small beasts. We've got Sangors, that are corrupted warriors. We got savage weapons. Then we have Sangor shamans. They fly on these creepy discs that can also attack with their teeth and horns themselves. And they have their own special spell, the Boon of Mutation. If you get hit by this spell and would be mortally wounded, you instead get transformed into a Sangor and become an NPC. And then Doom goes up by 1 if that happens to a PC. We've got the Hedonites of Slaanesh, including the massive Keeper of Secrets, who we see here. They've got an incredible list of stuff and 7s across the board for their skills, and 42 toughness, 11 wounds, superb close combat, superb damage, and extraordinary with a shield. They've got additional limbs, sinistrous hands, where they can rip out your heart and eat it, spellcasting, and their own special spell, like Cacophonic Choir. And then we've got Demonettes. For Nurgle, we have the Great Unclean One, who can use his own putrid guts to get additional dice for a channeling test. It can host Nurglings, so anything around it in its zone is a major hazard for any non-maggot kin. And it can also cast the special Plague Wind spell, which poisons everybody. It's got horrible blades that poison you. It's just lots of poison and death and plague and stuff. Plague Bearers are medium demons that also give you Grandfather's blessing of being poisoned. They can also poison you with their various attacks. Then we've got the Children of the Horned Rat, the Skaven. We've got the regular clan rats, the Grey Seers, or spellcasters. They have a great spell called Wither that causes the foe's body to wither away. They suffer 3 damage at the start of their turn for a number of rounds equal to 1 plus any additional successes, and that ignores armor, so you really don't want to get hit by that. They have the Vermin Lord Deceiver, which is their equivalent of like an enormous demon. They have the Doomstar that can do all kinds of crazy stuff when attacking and then returning. They can also do the dreaded Skitter Leap, where it vanishes to reappear somewhere else, and it can teleport a target and make their next attack ignore armor. And each additional success adds +1 damage to the attack as well. Plus it has multiple damaging attacks with rend for the warp stiletto, which is never fun. Then you have rat ogres. They've got warp fire guns for range attacks. You can get poisoned by them. They also have rabid fury when they smell blood. Then you got the Legions of Nagash. A lot of them have the ethereal and lifeless capabilities, so they can't be charmed or frightened, and they can't be hit by non-magical attacks, and they can pass through solid objects. But then each of them has some additional abilities as well. For example, the Glaive Wraith, their blade always points toward the beating heart of their next target. The Banshee has a mournful cry, which if you fail a DN5-2 soul determination test, you become frightened. The Vargeist has a feeding frenzy or blood-maddened rage and can track any creature that has suffered a wound on a winning an opposed test. Then we have the Flesh Eaters, so these are the ghouls, basically. We've got the standard Crypt Ghoul. They have a voracious hunger, and if another Crypt Ghoul is in the same zone, they get benefits to their attack. The Abhorrent Ghoul King or Queen, they have some great additional spell abilities. The Terrorgeist is enormous, nigh unkillable, lifeless, and has a death shriek that stuns targets, so that's really bad. And it also has claws that can rend and slash. Then we have the Bone Reapers. These are from Nagash's handiwork, so you got Mortek Guards. They have Great Blade Soul Cleavers. They can form shield walls to create an almost impenetrable barrier and block you from entering a zone. Acropolis Stalker is a large undead. You can see him here. He's got a 4-sided head, and whichever way his head is facing can change the aspects that are emphasized. So it increases melee, defense, damage, or give his weapons the penetrating trait, which is pretty awesome. Then we got the Greenskins. Our boys, the standard Greenskin Tough Nut. With the Weird Knob Shamans, they can cast Green Puke at you, as well as other spells. They also gain additional power if they're nearby Oryx in its zone. We've got the Grots, who are like little tiny goblins that swarm around. We've got Fungoid Cave Shamans, who can cause Spore Maws around you. We've got Troggoths, with kind of like trolls, that can regenerate flesh very quickly. And we have the lovely little Squigs that can do a funny boing the smash attack, which bounces way up into the air. And if it succeeds, it'll knock you prone and do double damage. Then finally we have a list of conditions, just so you remember, and a lovely copy of a blank character sheet with the second page and the party sheet, and then you're all done. So yeah, that is a look at the core rulebook for Soulbound from Cubicle 7. I really love this game. I highly recommend that you check it out, even if you know nothing about the setting. So I hope you enjoyed that and found it valuable. I will come back to this set of books and we'll look at the bestiary and some other aspects of the game in the future for sure. So in the meantime, take care. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you found it useful, shout me out in the comments, or if I got anything disastrously wrong, let me know as well. And leave a like and comment and a subscribe if you have some time, just to keep me motivated to make these videos. They do cost a lot of time and money for me, by the way. But more than anything, I hope you're having a great time, that you're being healthy and well and enjoying good gaming. So hope to see you in the comments below and see you again in the next video. So until then, take care and bye-bye.